no one noticed it at first. The man himself did not understand it either. It began quietly, without warning, without meaning. One morning, he simply did not feel hungry. He waited for the familiar sensation, the tightening in the stomach, the dull discomfort. But it never came. Hours passed, then a day. Still nothing. At first, he thought it was illness. He drank water, lay still, listened to his breathing. But his body felt light, unusually calm, as if it had already adjusted to something new. On the second day, he went outside. The sky was heavy with clouds, thick and slow-moving. He stood beneath them longer than necessary, staring upward. There was a strange pull in his chest, not emotional, not physical, something in between. When a low cloud drifted closer to the rooftops, he reached out without thinking. His fingers passed through cold mist. The sensation startled him. The air tasted different, clean, almost filling. He lowered his hand and waited. For the first time since waking, he felt satisfied. That night, he did not eat, or the next day, or the one after that. Instead, he walked. Whenever hunger should have come, he lifted his gaze to the sky. He followed the clouds through streets and open fields, standing beneath them as they thickened, letting the mist cling to his skin, his face, his breath. His heartbeat slowed. His breathing became deep but infrequent. Sometimes he noticed with mild surprise that several seconds passed without him breathing at all. And then, when the clouds drifted closer, his lungs would fill again, instinctively. Air was no longer something he consumed absent-mindedly. It was no longer background. Air had become nourishment. One evening, while crossing an open plain, he sat down on the ground. The clouds were not high above him this time. They hung low, swollen and slow, almost within reach. He closed his eyes. Cold brushed against his face. Not wind, not moisture, but something softer. The cloud passed through him rather than around him. For a moment, he felt as if his body had lost its outline. When he opened his eyes again, the hunger was gone. From that day on, he stopped counting hours by the sun or nights by darkness. He began to measure time by cloud movement, by density, by color. Thin clouds barely sustained him. Thick, heavy ones left him calm for days. His body adapted further. Food became repulsive. Water felt unnecessary. Even sleep changed. He no longer slept deeply. Instead, he drifted into long, quiet half-dreams whenever the sky was full. People began to notice. Villagers whispered when he passed. Children stared. Animals avoided him. They said he smelled like rain that never fell. They said the air around him felt wrong, thinner yet heavier at the same time. Once, a man asked him how long it had been since he last ate. He tried to answer, but he could not remember. That night, alone beneath a sky swollen with clouds, a realization settled in him, slow and unmistakable. He was no longer waiting for clouds. The clouds were waiting for him. They gathered when he stopped. They thinned when he moved. They followed. He wondered briefly what would happen if one day the sky were clear forever. The thought frightened him more than hunger ever had. So he kept walking, always toward heavier skies, always toward places where clouds were born, and somewhere deep inside, a quiet understanding formed. As long as there were clouds, he would survive. And if the clouds ever disappeared, so would he. The further he traveled, the less the land mattered. Mountains no longer impressed him. Rivers no longer tempted him. Cities became distant shapes, irrelevant, temporary, loud. What mattered was the sky. He learned to read it the way others read faces. A thin veil of grey meant patience. A towering mass of dark clouds meant abundance. A sharp, empty blue meant danger. On clear days, his steps slowed. His thoughts became heavier, not painful, just dim, as if something essential had been turned down. Once, he miscalculated. The sky remained empty longer than expected. No clouds arrived by dusk. The night came cold and bare. By morning, weakness crept into his limbs. Not hunger, not thirst, but absence. He felt hollow, as if something inside him had collapsed inward. He lay on the ground, staring upward, afraid to blink. Every minute without clouds felt longer than the last. Just before panic took hold, a single cloud appeared on the horizon. It was small, fragile, barely enough, but it was real. When it finally drifted above him, relief spread through his body instantly. His chest loosened, his thoughts cleared, and with that relief came something new. Gratitude, not toward the sky, but toward the clouds themselves. From that moment on, he stopped thinking of them as weather. They were no longer formations or accidents. They were beings. He began to speak to them quietly. Not words, not exactly, more like intention. When he needed them, he slowed his steps. When he felt full, he walked faster. And sometimes the clouds responded. They lingered when he rested. They followed his direction. They thickened when he grew weak. Other times they ignored him completely. That frightened him more than empty skies. One afternoon he noticed something unsettling. Wherever he stayed too long, the sky changed. Clouds thinned unnaturally fast. The air felt lighter, drained. It took him time to understand. He was consuming them, not just passing through them, using them. The realization filled him with a quiet guilt. He began to move constantly after that, never lingering, never staying long enough to empty the sky above one place. He became a traveler not by choice, but by necessity. Days blurred together. Sometimes he saw other people in the distance, travelers, farmers, wanderers. He avoided them. Their presence felt sharp, dense, too solid. Once a child pointed at him from afar and asked, "Why is the sky darker around him?" He did not wait to hear the answer. As weeks passed, his reflection began to change. His skin looked paler, almost translucent under thick cloud cover. His breath no longer fogged in the cold. He noticed one morning that his shadow was faint, as if the light struggled to decide where his body ended. That night, beneath a sky crowded with clouds, a thought emerged uninvited. What happens when there are no clouds left to follow? The idea no longer felt abstract. It felt close. So he turned north, toward colder air, toward heavier skies, toward places where clouds were not occasional, but constant. And as he walked beneath an ever-darkening sky, one truth became unavoidable. He was not living under the clouds anymore. He was living because of them. And whatever he was becoming, it could no longer return to a cloudless world. The north welcomed him with silence. The air grew colder, heavier. The sky stayed crowded, layered in endless shades of grey. Here, clouds did not drift. They rested. For the first time in weeks, he stopped walking. He built no shelter. He needed none. The clouds pressed low, wrapping the land in dim light. They fed him continuously, gently, without effort. At first it felt like peace. Days passed without hunger. without urgency, without fear of the sky clearing. But something else began to happen. The clouds stopped leaving. They gathered above him and stayed. Even when the wind rose, even when the temperature shifted, it was as if they had chosen him. The land beneath his feet grew damp, then soft. Snow fell briefly, melted and fell again. He noticed the ground sinking slightly where he stood, not collapsing, yielding. When he walked, the clouds followed, not quickly, but deliberately. He tried to outrun them once. He couldn't. No matter how fast he moved, the sky above him remained dimmer than the rest. That was when the fear returned. Not of starvation, not of exposure, but of attachment. If the clouds stayed with him, what happened to the places they no longer reached? He began to see signs. Villages beneath unusually clear skies. Dry air where moisture should have lingered. Fields cracking in patterns too sharp to be natural. He understood without proof. He was not just consuming clouds anymore. He was redirecting them. The clouds no longer belonged to the sky. They belonged to him. One evening, as the clouds pressed so low they brushed the hills, he spoke aloud for the first time. Go. The word felt strange in his mouth. The clouds did not move. He repeated it. Nothing. He felt something tighten inside his chest. Not pain, but resistance. A realization formed slowly, painfully. They no longer understood commands. They responded only to need, and his need had become constant. That night, he dreamed. Not images, sensations, weight, depth, endless grey pressing inward. He woke to find mist clinging to his skin, seeping into his clothes, refusing to lift. Breathing felt different. Easier, but less necessary. He tested it, holding his breath. Seconds passed, then minutes. No discomfort, no urgency. Air had become optional. Panic should have followed. It didn't. Instead, calm settled over him like a low ceiling. He walked for hours without breathing, sustained by the clouds around him. At dawn, he reached the edge of the northern land. Beyond it lay a vast expanse of ice and sky, where clouds were born, not consumed. He stood there a long time. The clouds thickened behind him, waiting. If he stepped forward into that frozen emptiness, the clouds would follow. If he stayed, they would remain trapped around him. And if he turned back, the world behind him would continue drying, clearing, emptying. For the first time, he understood the cost of survival. He could live forever beneath the clouds, or he could let them go and fade with them. The sky waited. So did the clouds. And for once, they did not move without him. He stepped forward. The ice did not crack. The wind did not protest. The clouds followed, not as a storm, not as fog. They descended like a decision already made. As he moved deeper into the frozen expanse, the world thinned. Sound vanished first. Then texture. The ice reflected nothing. Not light, not sky, not even his own shape. It was a surface that refused memory. The clouds gathered tighter around him, thick enough to dull distance. The horizon dissolved. He no longer knew how far he had walked. Time behaved differently here. There was no sunrise, no sunset, only shifts in density. Moments when the clouds grew heavier, then lighter, as if breathing through him. He realized something unsettling. The clouds were no longer feeding him. They were circulating through him, passing in and out, dissolving and reforming as though his body were no longer a boundary. He looked down at his hands. They were still there, but softer. Edges blurred slightly, like an image struggling to stay focused. When he closed his fingers, the movement lagged. Not delayed, but echoed, as if his body were remembering how to move rather than actually doing it. He stopped walking. The clouds did not. They continued flowing, pressing inward, until he stood at the center of a slow, rotating mass. A system. He was no longer beneath the clouds. He was inside them. A pressure built, not physical, but cognitive. Thoughts began to stretch. Simple ideas took longer to finish. Complex ones dissolved before reaching conclusion. He tried to recall where he had come from. The desert returned first, then hunger, then the sky without shade. The memories arrived thinner each time, like clouds evaporating as soon as they formed. Something occurred to him then, not as a thought, but as a certainty. If he stayed here long enough, there would be nothing left of him that could want to leave. The clouds were not consuming him. They were editing him, reducing him to what they required. He forced himself to move again, faster this time. The ice sloped downward, gently at first, then sharply. He slid more than walked, carried by momentum he did not initiate. The clouds tightened. Then, abruptly, they parted. Ahead lay a depression in the ice, a vast basin where clouds pooled like water. They did not rise here. They rested. At the center stood something impossible. A vertical column of condensed cloud, dense enough to appear solid, reaching upward into nothing. It pulsed faintly, not with light, with rhythm. As he approached, understanding returned suddenly, violently. This was not a place. It was a function. Clouds came here to be redistributed, balanced, returned to the sky. And he was an anomaly. The column reacted to his presence. The rhythm faltered. The clouds around him hesitated. For the first time since the desert, he felt something like pain. Not in his body, in his usefulness. He understood then what he had become. A sink, a deviation, a point where clouds disappeared instead of cycling back. That was why they had followed him. That was why they could not leave. The column pulsed harder. The clouds around him began to lift, slowly, reluctantly, pulled toward the structure. He resisted instinctively, not because he wanted the clouds, but because without them, he did not know what he was. The clouds strained. Some tore free, drawn upward. Others clung to him, wrapping tighter, almost desperate. For a moment, the system stalled. Then the decision was made. Not by him, by balance. The clouds detached, not violently, not suddenly. They slipped away like breath exhaled for the last time. The air thinned. Cold returned, real cold. He fell to his knees, lungs burning, skin aching. Breathing hurt. Hunger stabbed sharp and immediate. The clouds rose, drawn back into circulation, lifted into the endless grey above. The column steadied, the rhythm returned, the system healed. He remained, alone. For a long time he stayed there, gasping, watching the sky regain its depth. When he finally stood, he was smaller, heavier, defined. He walked away from the basin slowly, painfully. Behind him, the clouds moved freely again, unburdened. Ahead lay land he could not survive long in. But as he walked, one last thing happened. A thin veil of cloud drifted after him. Not enough to feed him, not enough to follow forever. Just enough to cast a faint shadow above his head. A reminder or a warning. He did not look back, and the sky did not stop him. He walked for what felt like days, though the sky offered no measure of time anymore. The cold followed him, not aggressively, just persistently. It crept through his clothes into his bones, reminding him that he was solid again, defined, mortal. The thin veil of cloud above him never left. It hovered like a hesitant companion, neither feeding him nor abandoning him. He tried to breathe normally. Each breath burned. Hunger returned in waves, sharp, insistent, humiliating. His body demanded what it had forgotten how to use. Food, water, rest. But there was nothing here. Only ice. Only distance. Only the quiet reminder that survival had once been easier when he was less human. He sat down. The ground was hard enough to feel permanent. The cloud shifted, thinning slightly, as if uncertain what to do now that he no longer belonged to it fully. "Stay," he whispered. His voice sounded foreign. The cloud responded by lowering itself, brushing his shoulders like a hand that did not know how to comfort. He closed his eyes. Memories surfaced again, clearer this time. The desert, the hunger, the first cloud he ever followed. Back then, the sky had been an answer. Now it was only a witness. His body weakened steadily. Movement became deliberate. Breathing became work. Thought became slow. Yet something inside him remained unchanged. The need for clouds. Not as food, as meaning. He stood again, forcing himself forward. The land sloped upward, away from the basin, toward higher ground where the sky felt wider, more open. The cloud followed, thinner now, fragile. As he climbed, wind began to form, real wind with direction and intent. It tore at the cloud, pulling pieces away. The cloud resisted weakly. He reached upward instinctively, though he could not touch it. "Don't," he murmured, but the wind didn't listen. The cloud thinned further, unraveling into scattered mist. For the first time since the desert, the sky above him looked empty, and the emptiness felt loud. His chest tightened, not from cold, from loss. He sank to his knees again, this time not from exhaustion, but from the sudden weight of silence. The clouds had never spoken, but without them, the world felt mute. He stayed there for a long time, staring upward, waiting for something to gather. Nothing did. Eventually, he forced himself to move again, not because he believed in survival, but because stopping felt final. The terrain changed slowly. Ice softened into frost, frost into stone, stone into pale soil. Far in the distance, shapes appeared. Mountains, dark, jagged silhouettes cutting into the sky. Clouds gathered there, not thick, not heavy, but present. He walked toward them. The journey drained him. Without cloud nourishment, his body reverted to old needs, old limitations. His stomach ached, his vision blurred, his limbs trembled, but he kept walking, not toward food, toward sky. By the time he reached the foothills, the clouds above were already shifting. Thin streams flowed over the peaks, breaking apart and reforming, never staying still. They did not descend for him. They did not recognize him. He collapsed near the base of the mountain, staring upward. The clouds moved without him now, balanced, complete. He felt smaller than he ever had before. Not insignificant, just unnecessary. His breathing slowed, the cold deepened, the hunger faded into numbness. Yet something strange happened as his body weakened. The air around him felt heavier, not with cloud, with presence. He realized the mountain itself was breathing, slowly, invisibly. Air rose from its surface in subtle currents, shaping the clouds above. The mountain was not a place clouds passed over. It was a place they were born from. He reached out, pressing his palm to the stone. It was warmer than the ground behind him. Alive, in a way the ice never had been. His body reacted, not with hunger, with resonance. The thin mist in the air thickened slightly, drawn toward the contact point. Not enough to feed him, enough to acknowledge him. He leaned closer, resting his forehead against the mountain. The world narrowed to sensation. Stone, breath, sky. He no longer felt separate from the air around him. Not absorbed, aligned. The clouds above shifted again, forming loose spirals. Not toward him, around the mountain. A system. He had never belonged to the clouds themselves. He had belonged to the process. And now, the process no longer needed him. His body grew lighter, not from clouds, but from surrender. Not from transformation, but from acceptance. The hunger stopped. The cold faded into distant sensation. Breathing became shallow but calm. He slid down slowly, coming to rest against the mountain's base. The sky above remained active. Clouds formed, clouds dispersed, clouds moved on. The cycle continued, without him. His vision softened, edges blurring not from clouds but from exhaustion. In his final moments, he did not think of survival. He thought of movement, of how clouds never stayed, of how neither had he. The wind passed over him gently, lifting a faint trace of mist from the ground, not from his body, but from the mountain itself. It carried the moisture upward, feeding the sky. He exhaled once, quietly, and the air accepted it. The clouds above shifted slightly, not in recognition, not in farewell, just in continuation, and the sky moved on. The mountain did not react. Stone never does. But the air around it shifted gently, as it always had. Clouds continued to gather above the peaks, forming and dissolving in quiet cycles. They did not linger. They did not search. Wind passed through the valleys, carrying fragments of mist upward, feeding the sky without memory or intention. Below, the ground remained still. No movement, no breath, only the slow cooling of what had once been warm. Time did not pause. It rarely does. The clouds drifted east, then north, reshaping themselves endlessly. Some grew heavy with rain, others thinned into pale threads of vapor. None of them returned, and nothing waited for them to. The mountain continued to breathe its invisible breath. The sky continued its endless motion. Somewhere between stone and cloud, between silence and air, the world remained exactly as it had been before, unchanged, unaware, and perfectly at peace.